Welcome everyone to today's webinar on positive leadership with Sue Langley. My name is Daniela Kwiatkowski and I'm the Manager of Training and Development at MHS. Before we get started with the webinar, I just have a few logistics that I'd like to go through. You are on mute, and we do that to keep the background noise to a minimum. There are a lot of people on the line today, and we want to make sure that you hear all of the presentation. We do want your questions though. So on the right-hand side in the panel, you'll see a question pane. Please use that to enter any and all of your questions at any point throughout the webinar. Sue will pause from time to time and answer any of the questions as they come in. We will do our best, or Sue will do her best, to answer as many of the questions as she can during the webinar. But if she doesn't get a chance to answer them all, we will make sure that we respond to all of the questions after the webinar is over. We are also recording today's webinar, and we'll send you a link within the next couple of weeks so that you can pass it on to any of your colleagues who didn't get a chance to participate in the live version here today. Now, a little bit about who we are for those of you who are meeting us for the first time today. Multi-Health Systems is a global publisher of scientifically validated assessments in the clinical, education, public safety, and talent assessment markets. We are located in Toronto, Canada, and have been in business for over 30 years. We publish assessments in over 50 languages and have a presence in 75 countries around the world, so we are truly global. The reason we highlight all of the markets we work in is that we use the same scientific rigor when developing our talent assessments as we do when developing an assessment in the clinical world, where the stakes are higher. We have to be 100% accurate when developing a test that assesses autism in children, and we use that same process when developing our talent assessments as well. Now I'm going to pass it over to Sue.
Thank you so much, Daniela. Oh, I think we've managed to skip a slide, but that's all good. So thank you so much, everybody, for being here, for joining me on the call this morning or this afternoon or this evening, depending where you are. My job for the next hour is to try and cover what you can see on the screen here. So we're talking about positive leadership and the ability to build cohesive teams, elevating people, using positive psychology to focus on what they do well, cultivating a positive climate, building relationships, communication, all of these sorts of things is what we're sort of trying to cover. Now, usually this would be a 6-day leadership program rolled out over a 6-month period, but I thought we'd try and cram it into an hour and see how we go. So thank you all for joining me, and it's an absolute pleasure because I can spend, well, I do spend all day talking about this stuff, and I find it, the research and the rigor that's coming out now around positive psychology and positive leadership is quite wonderful to try and leverage and use in your everyday. So if we think about what we're talking about here, I'll show you this model here. This model comes from a gentleman called Kim Cameron, who some of you may be familiar with. And Kim Cameron wrote a book called Positive Leadership, but he's also a professor at Michigan at the Ross Business School, focusing on positive organizational scholarship. And a fabulous gentleman who's done a lot of, as I say, research behind the scenes on positive psychology, positive leadership, and what they call positive organizational scholarship, which is how you take it from an organizational setting. And this is a lot of what we do in our leadership programs that we run all around the world. So if we think about what it's about, I'm going to focus more of my time on climate, because as I say, we do only have an hour. And what this is about is how do we foster a climate where positive emotions predominate over negative emotions? And this is quite critical, and we've partnered with MHS for many years now, running a lot of accreditations in the Mayor Salavi-Caruso model of emotional intelligence using the Mesquite. And this is where this emotional component becomes really important, is how do we build this positive climate for people? And sometimes it seems quite surprising when you sort of say to people that positive emotions predominate over negative emotions. And there's a piece of research that came out in 2010. And what they did is they looked at a number of organizations across a range of industries, and they looked at the types of emotions that were what they called acceptable, put that in little quotation marks there, acceptable to be expressed. And what they meant by acceptable, as in normal, it could be observed every day. And one of the things they found through that research was quite interesting, in that 53% of cases, anger and frustration was acceptable, as in normal, to be expressed in organizations. And in only 19% of cases was joy and happiness acceptable to be expressed. Now, sometimes when I share those statistics with people, they're often quite surprised, and you kind of wonder what sort of organizations they studied. But when you make it real and practical, which is what we try to do in our organization, is think about that in the workplace. Imagine yourself, you're sitting at your desk, working away quite happily, and someone to the right of you suddenly slams down their phone, stands up and goes, God, why is it always me? Why is it always me I have to deal with these idiots around here? It's the same stupid guy again. Same stupid guys yesterday asking the same stupid question. You'd look over and you probably wouldn't be overly surprised. You'd probably just look over and pat and give them a bit of a pat on the head and go back to your work. But let's imagine 5 minutes later you're working away and someone to the left of you suddenly puts down their phone, stands up and goes, oh, I'm just having the best day today. Really loving my job at the moment. Actually feeling pretty happy today. You'd probably look over a little bit more skeptical or surprised or wondering if they're being sarcastic or what they're on or something. So sometimes when you actually think about it in day-to-day interactions, it may not be so surprising that those statistics play out. Now, if you're lucky enough to work in an organization where positive emotions do predominate over negative emotions, then congratulations, because it does create that positive climate that we need in order to build ourselves and to build those around us. So if we think about here, people do their best work when they're in a positive frame of mind. So I'd love to just get some interaction from you through the chat window or the question window, and just think about the following question or the following situation. I'd like you to imagine that you're in your worst mood at work. So you're having a bad day and you're in your worst mood. Could you type in and tell me, what are you like when you're in that worst mood? So if everybody could just jump on. Hard to concentrate. Thanks, Pamela. Withdrawn, Brenda. Wonderful. Silent, grouchy. Okay, we're getting some good ones come through here. Quiet, grumpy, non-productive, Jennifer. Thank you. Quiet, intense, removed, introvert, irritable. Wonderful. Disengaged. Fantastic. Yep, we're more short and abrupt. Thanks, Diana. That's great. Distracted seems to be a common one. Snappy and snippy. Thank you. Okay, what else? This research what I should do. Okay, good. You're a mad bear, Kathy. I love that. Tired, mean, disengaged, short-tempered, sarcastic. Thank you, Pierre. That's fantastic. So when we look at these words, and we know what it's like. We've all been there. We've been frustrated, short-tempered, unhappy. We've been distracted, paralyzed, impatient. All of these words that we're seeing here. And if you think about this realistically, we've all been in this space at times. But think about those words that you just that I've just read out. How useful is that for good leadership? Do you want to be led by someone who's frustrated, unhappy, paralyzed, sarcastic, short-tempered, disengaged, tired, snippy, snappy, distracted, short, irritable, removed, grumpy? So we're not necessarily in our best space when we're in that frame of mind, and it's not overly good for leadership. But let's flip it on our head and let's think about the quote on the screen there. You do your best work when you're in a positive frame of mind. So let's see if that's true. So can you pop in the window again? What are you like when you're in your best mood? So you're in your best mood at work, you're feeling good, you're having a good day. What are you like? Let's see what answers we get on this one. Okay, productive, patient and understanding. Open to ideas, Jenna, thank you. Yeah, this is an important one. We're open to ideas and possibilities. Productive, enthusiastic, quiet, creative, energized, productive. Oh, lots of productive coming through there. Efficient, creative, yeah. And there's a lot of research, Joan, into the impact of our mood on our creativity and innovation. Interactive and chirpy, Aditi, thank you. Encouraging, joyful, productive again, smiling. Okay, accommodating, Don, thank you. And I think that's a really important one, is that we're more likely to be helpful, accommodating, open to people when we're in that positive emotional space. Encouraging, happy, creative, laughing, thank you, Dean. Receptive, open, energized, smiley, open-minded. Still pretty intense, Patricia, thank you. Gregarious, social, having fun, talkative. Oh, we've got lots more creative and energetic, playful, ease-filled, engaging, lots of engaged and engaging. I think that's a really important one I'll pick up on, is not only are we more engaged when we're in our best mood, but we're actually more engaging. We're more inspired when we're in our best mood, and we're more inspiring. So again, think about that for a moment and the impact that it has. Creative, willing to listen, talkative, effective, helpful, creative, collaborative, wonderful. Thanks, Jax. So I think that's an important one. When you think about, again, a lot of organizations are often trying to break down the silo effect. So how do we do that? Well, the emotional state people are in will influence how collaborative they're going to be. Intuitive, cheery, bouncing ideas. And look at how many more all of you have, and Charlotte, where do you type your responses? You have typed it in the correct space, my dear. Zena, you said you do not see the slides. I'm not sure what I can do about that one, my dear, my end. But yeah, and it will be available later, Michael. I don't think you've missed 10 minutes because we haven't been going that long, so you're all good. You probably only missed the introduction. All right, so let's continue then. So we've got a wonderful list of words about being motivated, creative, comfortable, excited, energized, inspiring, collaborative, talkative, engaged, etc. when we're in our best mood. So let's see what that actually looks like from a research perspective. So if we think about positive emotions, we know that positive emotions are more about than just we feel good. It actually does help us generate new ideas, encourage other possibilities in other people. And there's some wonderful research by a lady called Barbara Fredrickson called the broaden and build theory, which I know a couple of you on here are definitely familiar with because I recognize some names. Josephine, lovely to have you on. But thinking about this, if you haven't come across Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory, I'd really encourage you to, because it's one of the things that we keep in mind when we design any training program of the benefits of positive emotion. So if you have a look at the screen here, you'll see that her theory, the broaden and build theory, is basically that positive emotions help broaden the thought action repertoire. And Angela, you won't see other people's responses, my dear, I'm just reading them out. So the broadening, if we go to that, broadening of thought action repertoire, what that means is when you're in your positive emotional space, it broadens your ability to think. Now, I don't have time to go into all of the neuroscience today, but we know from neuroscience that actually when we're in a positive emotional space, more of our brain is actually active. So there's more areas, if you like, lit up when we're in a positive emotional space compared to negative. So it broadens our ability to think and recognize patterns and see possibilities. But also it broadens our ability to act. So if you think about this for yourself, when you're in your best mood, many of you mentioned you're more productive, because we're actually more likely to get off our bottoms and go and do something and get on with things when we're in a positive emotional space. We tend to be better at procrastinating or putting things off or distracting ourselves or going inwards and not doing when we're in our worst mood. And don't get me wrong, there's times when anger, for instance, can be a wonderful emotion to propel us to action. But in general, positive emotional spaces tend to lead more to action, and certainly more effective and productive action. But the other thing is they build our personal resources, and you can see all these little blobs around on the screen. If we start from the bottom right, positive emotions actually build our psychological resources. So when you think about this, your ability to be resilient, optimistic, hopeful, see possibilities in the future, but also developing a sense of identity and goal orientation. And again, think about this for yourself. When you're in a positive emotional space, you're probably more self-confident, more confident that you can tackle things. And it's actually what we do when we're in our positive emotional space that can actually be quite valuable to helping build resilience when we get hit by adversity. So that's important to bear in mind. We don't have to wait for adversity to hit in order to build our resilience. If you go then to the bottom left, social resources, Many of you commented that you're actually more helpful and supportive and collaborative, because guess what? When you're in a positive emotional space, you're more likely to build your social resources. And I'm sure many of you out there, you have to go to networking events as part of your role. And think about this, the last time you went to a networking event where you felt grumpy, miserable, negative, down, flat, think about, what were you thinking about? What was going through your mind as you're in that negative space and you're arriving or you're at that networking event? Tends to be what's going through our head is, how quickly can I get out of here? Not, oh, let me engage with the people around us. And maybe if you do engage with the people around you, you soon come out of that down space, if you like. But when we're in a negative emotional space, we don't want to connect with people often. We know it's probably good for us, but sometimes we don't want to. And again, we had those words come up on the screen that we're more isolated. We tend to pull ourselves back. So when we're in a positive emotional space, we're better at solidifying existing bonds and making new bonds. Top left, intellectual resources. Lots of research been done on people's ability to take in new information when they're in a positive emotional space, to problem solve and persist through problem solving. All of these sorts of things like creativity and innovation, there's a lot of research that shows we're better at that when we're in a positive emotional space. And then we've got the top right, physical resources. And this is one of the things that I love. There's lots of people researching the fact that when we're in a positive emotional space, we actually develop a lot of our physical resources. So our strength, even your grip strength, believe it or not, actually increases when we are in a positive emotional space. So our ability to develop coordination, to develop strength and cardiovascular health, our immune system is boosted, our digestion is boosted, all of these sorts of things when we're in a positive emotional space. So think about that for a moment. What we're trying to do is not make everybody happy at work, but basically look for an opportunity where positive emotions can dominate over negative emotions. They are more frequent. And Barbara Fredrickson has also looked at the ratio, positivity ratio of individual flourishing, that actually has found that people who are flourishing, so have higher levels of well-being, actually have approximately 3-to-1 ratio of positive emotion to negative emotion. But again, there's a lot more we could say about that if we had more time. So let's move on and then think about how this relates to leadership. So if you think about some of the things that you heard when you were expressing your best mood, worst mood, if you like, we need to understand that when it comes to leadership and organizations, if we want to build a positive climate, we need to start from a leadership perspective, because up to 70%, and this is research by Gallup, of how employees perceive their climate is basically on the leader and how the leader shows up. So it does make a huge impact to us from a leadership perspective of how the leader actually creates that climate. And I have an exercise I do on one of our leadership programs that often creates a bit of shock to people initially when we ask them to do it. And it's basically to do a gratitude video. It doesn't take them many minutes, it's done there and then. And one lady, when I first asked them to do it, she said, "Everyone will think I've got a terminal disease if I do this." And I said, "Well, what sort of climate have you created that is going to make them think that when you're expressing gratitude, you're dying?" So we really need to consider, what are we putting out there as leaders, and how do we try and create learning where people can actually develop their ability around this emotional space. So how do we remain positive? Now, many leaders have got so much going on in their world, so many pressures and restructures and mergers and acquisitions and pressures from the amount of work people have to do and all sorts of things. So sometimes it can be hard to remain positive. So some of the things that we need to consider is, how do we use this emotional intelligence element to try and ensure that we can actually manage our own emotions and try and stay more frequently in that positive emotional space. And we use the Mesquite as a test, and we use the Mayor Salvia Caruso model in some of our leadership and emotional intelligence programs of helping develop skills around people's ability to perceive emotions in others and themselves, to use emotions to facilitate their cognitive processes, to understand what triggers emotions in themselves and how they might change over time, and also how they might manage their own and others' emotions. Not so that we never have those worst moods that we spoke about, but at least so that we've got some skills and strategies to get ourselves out of them more quickly, and also reduce the impact that they might be having on those around us. And this is where I want to take you into the neuroscience space. And again, I only have an hour, so we don't have time to go through all of this in detail. But if you wanted to see a talk on the neuroscience and a basic, simple description of how the brain works that can help us from a leadership perspective, if you jump onto our website, which is justlangley.com.au, you'll actually go to the resources tab. You'll find a little video on at a conference, me talking about for 15 minutes how the brain is wired and how it can help us. But basically, if we think about this, the brain has particular functions that it has to do. Understanding new information, memorizing information, recalling information, inhibiting thoughts. What that means is while you're trying to focus on one thing, there's little, oh, what shall we have for tea? Oh, I forgot to call that person back. Oh, what about this? So our ability to actually inhibit that and focus on one thing and make decisions. And when we do these functions, it helps us to do all the really cool things we have to do as leaders, such as planning, problem solving and decision making, being strategic, paying attention, self-regulating. All of these sorts of things are things we have to do, and we rely on some of those major functions in order for that to happen. But when you think about the part of the brain that has to do this, your prefrontal cortex, if you imagine you put your hand over your forehead, or you can even do it if you like, nobody can see you. Put your hand over your forehead, as I'm doing now, and this is your prefrontal cortex, which is often the part of the brain that's involved in a lot of these higher order functions. And we use the analogy of that this part of the brain is a bit like a Lamborghini or a Maserati or something like that, that needs a lot of fuel to run. And by fuel, we mean neurotransmitters and hormones and so on. But basically, it takes a lot of energy. So when you are problem solving and strategizing, your prefrontal cortex is needing a lot of fuel to get that to happen, to make that happen effectively. Whereas a lot of your habitual elements, so your ability to repeat things you've done 101 times before, your emotional center and so on, that part of your brain and inside your limbic brain is actually more responsible for those automatic processes. So again, an analogy I often use is they're like a smart car or a Toyota Prius or a Tesla or something that runs on very little fuel and just keeps going over and over and over again. So again, if we want to change leadership, we need to change the habits that go on behind the scenes. And that requires initially prefrontal cortex effort before they actually start to become habitual. And one of the things that, again, as an analogy you may have come across is this whole concept from a prefrontal cortex perspective of the stage is small. And what that means basically is when you try and change habits or when you try and embed new habits, you have to use your prefrontal cortex to self-regulate, to force yourself, if you like. And the capacity of that prefrontal cortex is limited. And our ability sometimes when we're low on fuel, and as I said, that means neurotransmitters and things like that, is when we're low on fuel, it's almost like the stage gets smaller, our capacity is reduced. So think about yourself for a moment. When you are tired, you've had a stressful day, you've been making lots of decisions, lots of concentration, lots of focus. If you imagine that fuel gauge has dropped quite significantly, your ability to actually function as effectively is probably reduced. I can guarantee all of us out there have probably made really stupid decisions at the end of a long day when we're tired and grumpy and things like that. Or any of you, if you've ever had a young baby in the house and you've had a few months where you've been running on just a few hours sleep, you know that you're not as effective and your prefrontal cortex, the capacity for it to work, has probably been diminished. So again, there's lots of things you can read on this if you want to know more, but one of the things we always try and talk about is the neuroscience and the brain behind the scenes. But also the fact that your brain can rewire itself. We know now from neuroscience that neuroplasticity is a very real concept, and actually being able to rewire and change the patterns is possible, not just as a baby and a child, but in an adult. And I don't know where I read this, and it might be an urban myth, but the oldest person registered growing a new neuron was 92 years old, and I think that's really cool. I want to be growing new neurons when I'm 92 years old. So we need to be using this underpinning science where we can to help leaders to be more effective. And guess what? When we're in a positive emotional space, our capacity to do that is increased. Because when I mentioned the fuel element, and I know I'm throwing a lot of information at you right now, when I mentioned this fuel element, which is the neurotransmitters, one of the key pieces of fuel, if you like, or parts of fuel that we need is dopamine. And when you're stressed and under pressure and angry or frustrated or scared or whatever your dopamine levels are actually dropping. Whereas when you're experiencing positive emotions, you'll actually find that you're producing dopamine. So dopamine is increasing. And I think that's really important for us to understand. If we expect our leaders to be functioning well, making good decisions, being strategic, paying attention, regulating themselves, etc., then actually them being fueled up and they're being at their best, not just physically, but their brain capacity as well, is really critical for us. So let's jump a little bit further then and think about, well, if we know positive emotions increase our dopamine and enable us to perhaps function more effectively, what can we do to actually increase our well-being? Well, probably trying to do that in a 1-hour webinar is going to be impossible. But one of the things that we look at is on all of our programs, the first place we start off is how do you perform at your best? And that means looking after your own well-being. So we actually have a tools and techniques booklet, 160 ways to regulate your emotions and to increase your well-being. If again you want to jump onto our website, the resources tab, you'll find a whole bunch of resources and ebooks and so on that you can download that link to this as well. But the reason that this is so important, again from a leadership perspective, is another piece of research I'm going to introduce you to. So some of you may have come across this research by a gentleman called Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. They have studied basically the influence of networks. And what they found is, and they started with what's known as the Framingham Heart Study, which was actually looking at things like smoking and obesity initially. And then they decided to look at happiness. And they wanted to see what was the impact of networks on people's levels of well-being. And there were some interesting statistics that I'll sort of go through. I haven't got them all shared on the screen here. But basically, they were looking at what they called the 3 degrees of happiness. And it was the same 3 degrees that they found for smoking, the same 3 degrees they found for obesity. And that some of the stats were pretty similar. So basically what it means is, if we start on the left, if you make yourself happier, so if you increase your well-being, then if we go to the next statistic to the right, a friend of yours within a 1-mile radius actually has a 25% increased chance of their well-being lifted. So basically by you increasing your well-being and happiness, you impact a friend of yours with an increased chance of their well-being going up by 25%. Now think about that, that's a friend within a 1-mile radius. If you take out the distance, the 1-mile radius, it actually dropped to 15%. But basically within a 1-mile radius, 25% increase in well-being. But here's the interesting thing is, the 3 degrees was the ripple effect. So let's imagine it's only 15% and they're not within a 1-mile radius and they've got a 15% hit to their well-being. A friend of theirs, who you might not even know, has a 10% increased chance of improving their well-being. A friend of theirs, who again you don't even know, has a 5.6 increased chance of their well-being lifted. So basically the node, if you like, the person in the middle that's increasing their well-being has a ripple effect beyond them that increases the chances of other people lifting their well-being. And if we think about why this is, and we think about how it might link to leadership and other things, we think about why this is. Think about the changes in behavior and the changes in habits when one person changes themselves. So we ran a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. It's a government accredited qualification. And within that diploma, we always start off by saying to people, we're going to ask you to start by being selfish, which is always a surprise to people because we know that positive psychology is not about being selfish. But the reason we ask that is because of this research, that actually if you start with yourself and look after your well-being and trying to be the best version of you, the ripple effect beyond you is far greater than if you're just trying to fix everybody else. So consider that for a moment. You increase your well-being. A friend of yours within a 1-mile radius has a 25% increase. Outside of that radius, 15%. Then a friend of theirs, 10%. A friend of theirs, 5.6%. And think about that if you flip it from a smoking or an obesity perspective. it changes your behavior. It changes the choices you make. Do you choose when you increase your well-being to go to healthier restaurants, or you ask your friend to go for a walk rather than, sit in McDonald's to meet? So the choices that you're making around your well-being and looking after yourself will change your behavior. It's the same at work. If you get a leader who focuses on themselves and their team's well-being, they're more likely to make choices of walking meetings. They're more likely to make choices that include kicking off a meeting with 3 things that we're grateful for, or 1 success or 1 win today. They're more likely to have meetings that leverage positive communication. So this is what we're trying to do, is to start with self and looking after own well-being and making sure our own brains are working more effectively, so that actually the ripple effect we can have is far stronger. So I'm just going to pause there for a moment and see if anybody's got any sort of questions that come from there before I get into the communication, meaning and relationship piece. So I will just pause in case people want to type any questions in, although I'm happy to answer along the way. So Brenda, whose research was the 3 degrees piece? It was basically a gentleman called Nicholas Christakis, which is Chrisstakis, and James Fowler. And he's actually got a very cool website that actually has various networks on there. And they've recently done things, 1996, 2000, and I think there's 2004 or 2006. And there might even be some more frequent ones there that actually look at the impact online as well. So how do our networks work from an online as well as a community face-to-face perspective? And Charlene, more than happy to send stuff to you. We will be sending out a follow-up with a few links so that you can download some of the elements as well. So yeah, we will send a follow-up email once we get the all your contact details to send that out. All right, well, I will pause again in case there's any more questions that come up. But let me just briefly look at communication meaning, and I'm only going to touch on these, and then we're going to spend a little bit more time on the relationship piece. So communication, this is where it's about affirmative and supportive language replacing negative and critical language. And sometimes people get the wrong impression of this. They think it's about the fact that we have to be nice all the time. We have to say nice things all the time, and we're not allowed to say anything negative. I've got another question here from Melody that I'm going to come back to, my dear. So with regard to the communication, this is not about being nice and saying nice things all the time and never saying anything mean. And again, it's a ratio. So if you look at some of the research around this, it actually looks at, it actually looks at how we communicate. And again, this is where your emotional intelligence comes in, of making sure that we can manage our emotions well enough to communicate more effectively, that we can understand what emotions might be going on behind the scenes for somebody else and what's triggering them. So again, your emotional intelligence really comes into the fore here. But what we're looking at is a positive-negative ratio, and it is a ratio, so it's not about, as I say, only positivity. But I mentioned Barbara Fredrickson's positivity ratio of well-being, which is 3:1. John Gottman actually had a ratio of 5:1 many years ago in personal relationships. And a lady called Linda Robson has done some more recent research in organizations that has actually found the highest performing teams have a ratio of approximately 4.32:1. And what that means is, are we expressing things like appreciation, support, help, approval, compliments more frequently than criticism, disapproval, cynicism, sarcasm, those sorts of things? But it's also about congruency of message. And again, this is where emotional intelligence comes in. If I'm a leader and I'm stressed and overwhelmed and we've got to restructure and I'm worried, all of that sort of thing, it's not about faking it. It's not about pretending I'm not worried. It's actually 2 things: either being honest but still having the strategies to pull and inspire my team together, but being honest that I'm concerned too, or being able to manage my emotions effectively so that I can still show up in a positive emotional space and acknowledge what might be going on around me. And again, we call this, it's called the PNR, positive negative ratio. And with some of our clients, we'll actually sit in on boardroom meetings or senior leadership meetings and actually tally the PNR, the positive negative ratio. And it's always really interesting that usually those with a more effective ratio, so somewhere around the 4 or 5:1, have shorter meetings, more effective meetings, more solutions that come out of it than those who have a more negative ratio. And what that means is things like person A says, I've got a great new idea, and person B goes, well, that won't work. We tried that before. Person C jumps in and says, no, that with our clients, that doesn't work. And anyway, where are we going to get the budget for that? That's that negativity that actually drags communication down. It doesn't mean to say you can't challenge and you can't voice concerns, but it does mean that you're putting it across in a way that actually is done in a positive way. So when person A comes up with a great new idea, even if you can see some flaws in the plan, you're able to turn around and say, so one of the challenges I can see is budgeting for that. Where do you consider we're going to get that budget? Or these are some obstacles in the way. How do you see us overcoming those? Or tell me more about that idea. So it's actually exploring it through a more positive framework, and it actually shortens meetings. Meaning, and again, Melody, I promise I'm going to come back to you. Positive meaning. I'll just pause here because there are a few questions come through. Linda, you're absolutely right. So, of course, as a leader, we go through unhappy times. And the most important thing is understanding the impact that we're having. And for me, it's about having strategies so that you can manage yourself and still stay in the best space you can without pretending or faking it. Emotional intelligence and positive psychology is never about faking it, but it is about having enough strategies in your toolkit that you can actually get yourself out of it. You can still manage to function as best that you can. And this is why we often talk about having a smorgasbord of strategies. And what that means is having a range of strategies for a range of different situations, for a range of different emotions. Because let's imagine you have exercise or running as a go-to strategy, and then you break your leg. Well, that's going to be a challenge, because how do you go running? Or let's imagine, and I had somebody say this to me, you have a day where you can't go for a run because things happen. And he said to me, oh, I'm like a bear with a sore head all day when I don't go for my run. Well, that's a challenge. So we need a range of strategies. And it is absolutely knowing the impact. Okay, Dawn, you're having a challenge with that, and some people are still hearing music. I'm not sure what I can do about that, but hopefully one of the tech guys might be able to help there. And coming back to Melody's perspective of working in a vacuum, so many of us, we don't work in a vacuum completely. Hopefully we still have clients and people that we talk to. But when you work by yourself, that can have a whole different set of impacts on your well-being. So I know for a lot of people, especially when they first start working for themselves or working from home, one of the challenges is that sort of motivation or that ability to avoid procrastination and distraction, and actually, again, still looking after our well-being. Or what tends to happen is, I don't know about anybody else, when you tend to get busy, you work all the time, and therefore you've kind of gone off the other end of the spectrum. So again, it's having the strategies in your toolkit to still stay the best version of yourself the most frequently. All right, so also about believing the other, absolutely. So thank you, Pierre. It's about looking after people's well-being. And again, one of the best ways you can do that is making sure you're showing up as your best version of yourself. Because if you're not in your best space, your ability to perceive emotions in other people might diminish. Your ability to understand and then manage and handle challenges going on for another people might diminish when you're in a negative space. So it's absolutely, and this is why well-being is becoming so important to more and more organizations. And I can take the cynical view of we're only interested in people's well-being because we get more productivity and more performance. But I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It seems to still be a bit of a win-win, if you ask me. You get more performance and you look after someone's well-being. But it is genuinely about knowing that when people are in that best emotional space, it's better for the people around them, it's better for the business, it's better for customers and all of those sorts of things. So it is about believing in people and believing in helping people be the best version of themselves. And I think if we can keep that in mind as leaders and start with ourselves and then help other people, I think that's quite a powerful place to be. All right, very briefly on meaning. When we're talking about meaning, it's about making sure people feel that they are engaged in meaningful work and positive outcomes. And this is really critical, not when you're having a good day, but when you're having a bad day. And I think that's really important. When you're having a bad day, being able to reconnect to your sense of meaning of why you do what you do, whether you're working for yourself, working from home, or whether you're working elsewhere, it's really important to actually reconnect with your values and that what they call concordance. So being concordant with what you're doing. And yes, thank you about Wanda, your putting your own oxygen mask on first. That's exactly what it's about. With the meaning component, again, our emotional intelligence and our ability to sort of understand how emotions work is really critical for us. And this understanding emotions piece is about understanding what makes people tick, both ourselves and others. So do we understand people's values and what matters to them, so that when we tap into that sense of meaning, we can really tap into it in a way that is meaningful to the people in our team. And when we think about this sort of thing, I thought I'd just share with you a story around this of a gentleman who I had on a leadership program fairly recently. And he ran an engineering team. They worked in a basement with no windows underneath the hospital, where they would fix the equipment that came in. So a bunch of them all down there, all blokes, stuck down in the basement. And he said the climate of the team, everyone, you know, kind of gets along, but people have are quite lethargic and kind of lost touch with why they do what they do. You know, a piece of machinery sort of appears outside the door, they wheel it in, fix it, wheel it back out again, and it gets taken away. And so what he did following the leadership program that we went through, which I thought was quite lovely, he took his iPhone and next time a piece of equipment came in, he recorded one of his team or a couple of his team members fixing it. He did this for a few pieces of equipment. But what they didn't know is he then followed the piece of equipment as it went back to the hospital. And he interviewed the doctors, the nurses, the patients, and the admin team during their interaction with this piece of machinery. And he put it all together in a little short video, and he showed it to his team. And he said the change in their emotion and their connection to why they do what they do was significant and lasting. I'm not saying last forever, but it certainly lasted several months of ongoing, you know, wow, we do make a difference out there. So sometimes just helping people tap back into that sense of meaning is really important for us as a leader. And then the last one, and I know I've only got 20 minutes left, and I really want to talk about this for a lot longer, is relationships. And Michael, thank you so much for your comment. And I agree that, yes, some of the negative messages that are out there all day, and you said any thoughts on how to stay positive. Well, I'm going to give you one, and you're probably not going to like it, but stop watching the news. You know, I get my news from various other places these days, places like Upworthy and things like that actually give me more uplifting news. But I know that's not always the answer. But I think if we can stay looking after or stay believing that in general people are good people and want to do the right thing, how we sometimes come across is very can be very different. But I'm a big believer in most people are good people. We just get it wrong now and again. And again, when we're in a negative emotional space, all of us on this call have done and said things that we regret and that are less effective, shall we say. So thank you, Michael. I'm glad you like my idea of stop watching the news. I actually stopped watching the news probably about 5 years ago, and it certainly hasn't harmed my life in any way, and it's definitely helped it. So, all right, so positive relationships. This is the one I'd like to end on, just simply because positive relationships are so critical to us, not only organisationally, but just as individuals. We know that in every culture around the world, when wellbeing is studied, and there's a wonderful gentleman called Ed Diener who's done all sorts of cross-cultural studies into wellbeing and subjective wellbeing, and has found that relationships are one of the critical components in any culture of high levels of wellbeing. So in an organisational setting, we're looking at relationships that are a source of enrichment and vitality, both to the individual and to the organisation. And when we look at what this means, even if you look at Gallup on their engagement survey, their Q12 questions, they actually have a question of, do I have a best friend at work? So we know relationships are really important. Dawn, I know you probably can't hear me because you've got challenges with your voice, but we will send the recording for anybody who is having challenges there. So when we talk about relationships, again, this emotional component becomes really important. Do we understand what people are going through? Do we even care what people are going through? Can we pick up on those cues? Can we use people's emotions, and I mean in a good way, to actually help facilitate thinking and cognitive output? Can we understand what they might be going through and why they might be experiencing the emotions they're experiencing? And then most important, what are we doing to manage them? And again, one of the key components when we think about positive leadership is how do we leverage strengths in people? So I'll give you a moment just to read this definition that you can see here. So this definition by Alex Linley, he is a bit of a guru in the strengths space. He's been focused on strengths for over 40 years, done an awful lot of research into this, this field. And his definition here, a pre-existing capacity, it doesn't mean you were born with it. It may have started when you were younger, or it might have been something you learned in your last job, but basically means prior to now. And the reason I love the strengths approach is it actually looks at not putting you in a box necessarily of this is your personality or this is your particular preference or so on, that we can then potentially, it can help us, but we can also use it as an excuse of, oh, I'm an extrovert, that's just how I am, you just have to put up with it. I know a colleague of mine, she did DISC once, and she still to this day says, well, I'm just a high D, that's the way I am. So sometimes when we do some of these psychometrics, we can sort of box ourselves and put ourselves or other people into this sort of scenario, whereas strengths is designed to be dynamic. So it is pre-existing, but it's just prior to now. The key words I love in here is authentic and energizing. So it feels authentic to us when we use these strengths, and it energizes us. And it's about optimal performance. So we'll have a little dig into this, and I'm going to share with you a piece of research that I particularly love. And again, if you're interested, please shoot me an email, sue@langley.group.com.au, and I'm more than happy to send this research and graph to you. But basically, this piece of research is quite powerful into why every organisation needs to start focusing on strengths, and every individual needs to start focusing on strengths. And the research itself was done by the CLC, the Corporate Leadership Council, which is based in London, a very well-reputed organisation. And they looked at the impact or the change in performance based on how people were performance reviewed, if you like. And the reason I love it, and you can see down the bottom here, nearly 20,000 people were involved in this study across a range of organisations. And yes, the slides and the recording will be shared, so you'll get the recording, and we will send out a follow-up email for those who've just asked. So let me go back to this research. So focus your attention for a moment on the purple graph. So the purple side, the right side of the graph, and you will see that it says at the top, emphasis on performance weaknesses. Basically what that looks like is you are my boss, I come in for my performance conversation, and you say to me, hi Sue, these are your strengths, and these are your development opportunities. And we're all very nice, we call them development opportunities, we don't call them weaknesses, but in this study they actually called them weaknesses. So think about that. I'm in your office, you say, these are your strengths, these are your development opportunities. Let's put in place some KPIs, some goals for the next 12 months around your development opportunities. And that's how many organisations still do their performance reviews. It's what we've been doing for years. We look at the gap and we try and fix the gap. The CLC actually found in this research that the impact on my performance over a 12-month period is a drop of 26.8%. Think about that. The standard way we do performance reviews gets a reduction in performance. Now, I deliberately started this webinar getting you to think about what you're like in your best mood and your worst mood. So let's go back to that broaden and build theory element. When I have to focus on the things I am not good at and I don't like doing for a whole year, I'm hoping you can now understand why that drop in performance happens. I'll give you a personal example in a moment. But now let's focus on the orange graph, so the left-hand side. Emphasis on performance strengths. This is me coming into your office and you saying, hi Sue, these are your strengths, these are your weaknesses. If we need to get your weaknesses to a certain level for you to be competent in your role, then we might have to focus there. But guess what? For the next 12 months, we're going to put some goals in place around your strengths. This led to an increase in performance over 12 months of 36.4%. So think about that, 36.4%. I don't know about you, I wouldn't mind if I just got 15% increase in performance from my team. And Angela, appreciative inquiry, absolutely. Appreciative inquiry is part of positive psychology. And ironically, we've just brought out Sarah Lewis over to Australia from the UK, and she's running an appreciative inquiry day for us tomorrow. She's a bit of a guru in this space. A couple of good books called Positive Psychology at Work and Positive Psychology and Change. Yeah, absolutely. Appreciative inquiry is part of positive psychology. Strengths is part of positive psychology. So let me give you a personal example of this, just so that you can understand how this works. If you were my boss, you would very quickly establish that financial stuff is a weakness for me. And we would both recognize that in my role running a consulting business, that there is a risk to me having financial stuff as a weakness. So we might need to do something about it. But let's imagine we took the path on the right of emphasis on performance weaknesses. This would basically mean that you and I together would set a year's worth of activity around improving my Finance 101, my ability to do budgets and read P&Ls and set targets and all that financial stuff. And over the next 12 months, perhaps I would go one day a week or one day a month to a particular course on Finance 101. I would learn it once a month. I would go somewhere, and that might be one of the activities that we do. But I'd like you to think about emotionally how I might feel when I attend that course. Every time I show up for that course, I might be feeling anxious. I might be feeling worried because I really don't get it and I really don't like it. I'm sitting in the course feeling intimidated because other people clearly know more than me, because I hate this stupid finance stuff and I can't believe my boss has sent me on this course. I might start feeling resentful because I'm doing this stupid course and I don't get it. And I know it's important, but it's difficult and I'm not really taking it in. And again, we know from broaden and build theory, I don't learn as much when I'm in a negative emotional space. So I'm probably not learning as much on the course as I would like. Then, of course, I come back to work the following day and I'm even more resentful because I've now got 300 emails backed up in my inbox because that stupid course I was on yesterday. So again, there's a lot of negativity. And what tends to happen is not only do my weaknesses will improve, I will get better at Finance 101, but my engagement, my ability to inspire my team, my strengths might start diminishing because I'm not being able to get out and facilitate and run leadership programs and do keynotes and all that sort of thing. That's diminishing because I'm focusing on these stupid budgets and so on. So potentially you can see why my performance may drop. But let's flip to the other side for a moment and say, well, we can't ignore the fact that Finance 101 is, something that I need to work on because of, the role that I have. But let's imagine you emphasize performance strengths and you say to me, Sue, you are fantastic at doing keynotes, inspiring people, doing motivational talks. You are fantastic at running leadership programs and facilitating. We want you to do more of that. And we're going to set some goals that means you get to do global programs, you get to fly around the world and inspire as many people as you possibly can. Fantastic. But we also need you to get your Finance 101 in order. You need to get to a certain standard so you can at least put a budget in place. If I know that, but my KPIs are set on the things I'm really good at, the energy, inspiration, engagement that I get from focusing every day on the things that I'm really good at may enable me to tackle my weakness in a little bit of a different way. And I'm using this as an example because it's a real life example. I've outsourced 80%, 90% of my finance stuff, which is a great start, but I can't outsource it all. So what I've done instead is I've got this guy who I've had breakfast with a couple of times, I've had lunch with a couple of times, who is an absolute whiz-bang guru, who's taught me some stuff over breakfast. And I have learned more from him in 4 hours of learning and engaging over breakfast and having a bit of a laugh and him understanding where I'm coming from, because I sought him out to try and get better than I would have if I'd have been forced to go on a particular program around this. So it is about positive reinforcement. It is about leveraging strengths. And oh, I just deleted someone's message. Oh, I'm so sorry, I clicked the wrong button. So I can't remember who it was. I'm so sorry, I deleted somebody. Then how do we fix those development opportunities? So Eloise, that's the perfect one. And I'm going to get to that with thinking about, if you're interested in strengths, what you do is you don't try and fix the weakness. You actually try and use a strength to overcome or to help, but only if there's a risk. If there's no risk, who cares? If I don't have to adhere to rules and be detailed in my role, who cares whether I've got them as a weakness? We don't need to worry about them. But if there's a risk, then we try and use a strength to actually overcome that. And I've got 5 more minutes. I'm going to give you one more example of how this works. I have adherence as a weakness, so adherence to rules and compliance. But we run the Langley Group Institute, which is a registered training organisation, and therefore, from a government perspective, we have to adhere to lots and lots and lots and lots of rules. We're just about to have audit. We've got lots and lots of things we have to do. And we run a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing. And basically, again, we have to fill in lots of forms and do lots of things according to rules in order to continue to do that. So I can't just ignore that adherence as a weakness. There is a risk. So again, how do I fix that? Well, the first thing I've done, because I can, and it may not always be the case, but the first thing I've done is outsourced about 90% of that. When I say outsourced, I mean another member of my team who has adherence as a strength. She does most of that, and she is fantastic at it. But when I'm, for instance, in London running a diploma of positive psychology and wellbeing myself, I can't outsource it because I'm the only one in the room. So I have to fill in certain forms and do certain things at certain times to adhere. But again, if you try and get me to better my adherence, you will probably fail. So what you do is you find out what strengths I have got that will mean the adherence becomes irrelevant. And I can tell you myself, I've got 3 strengths I draw on. One is mission, which is what is it I'm heading for, what's my goal? I'm really clear on us as a business, getting our diploma, going global, getting as many people go through that as possible. It's an amazing program. We're just wrapping up one in Brisbane today. And we know it makes a difference, has a huge ripple effect. So my mission, I know exactly what we're heading for. Legacy of what do I want to leave behind? The legacy I want to leave behind is creating ripple effects all around the world around positive psychology. Well, if I lose my license, that legacy is gone. So again, I'm focused on mission and legacy when I'm doing programs and I'm working in the team and so on. The third one that I do in the moment there and then is I have the strength of order. Now think about this for a moment. What I do is when I set up my room, if you like, for the 6-day program, I basically lay out every single piece of paper in the order I need it. I have an orderly checkbox of what I need to do in order to every day hand out the right pieces of paper, get the right pieces of paper back in. I have a process that when I hand one out, I tuck the previous day behind and so on, so it rolls through. So I use my strength of order to compensate for my strength of adherence, or my weakness, should I say, of adherence. And the interesting thing is, I've never forgot a piece of paper, but not by you making me adhere to the rules, by using my strength of order. So I hope that helps, Anne-Louise, around that. Patricia, what impact does the social rather than prescribed learning method? Absolutely has a difference. And again, it's the ripple effect, Patricia. So if we can get the tipping point, and again, I'll give you an example. One of our clients we've been working with over the last sort of 3 or so years, we run all of their leadership programs at all levels. And it's a 185,000 global company, and we run across Australia and New Zealand. We're about to leverage into the rest of the business. But across Australia and New Zealand, we've been running leadership programs now for 2 years, plus some introductory sessions the year before. The thing that is fantastic now is we've trained up 27 people internally around the strength stuff, which then go out and train up other leaders. They also run strengths half-day team workshops, which we've trained them up in. We still run all the leadership programs, but all of these 27 people are out there leveraging and doing the strength stuff. Our alumni from the leadership programs from the last 2 years, of which there's now 150 across Australia and New Zealand, are also running values workshops, behaviour workshops, so that they're actually leveraging it. They're teaching other leaders how to have strengths-based conversations. So the social connection, if you like, and the ripple effect now is, yes, we as a consulting firm still do the leadership programs, which are fabulous, but the ripple effect now from people taking ownership and actually going out into the business has completely changed the culture, and it's really powerful. So the socialization is really important. Yes, I am aware, Diane, of the work of Rick Hansen, absolutely, him and many, many others. I was the first person in the world actually to get a master's in the neuroscience of leadership, so I am loving all the neuroscience and neuroplasticity. Patricia, repackage the ask. I guess you could think about it like that. It's basically using a strength to overcome tasks, even when you don't want to do them, or you don't like them, or you're not good at them. How do you, and again, I'll give you an example. I had to have a very tough conversation a couple of years ago around legal stuff I'd never had to do before. Before I jumped on that call, I made sure I knew exactly what strengths I was going to use. Do you prefer the VIA? Okay, Connie, really good question that I'm going to finish with. The VIA is useful, but it's not a workplace-based tool. It's free, which is great, and we use it in our Growing Great Schools part of the business. Gallup's Strength Finder has 34 strengths, and it is designed for workplace. The R2 Strengths Profiler, if you want to know anything about that, please jump on our website. Please email me, ask me, let me know. I think the R2 is far better because it has 60 strengths, workplace-based, and it is the only tool that measures energy. So think about that. It looks at the difference, not just what your strengths are, but whether it energizes you or de-energizes you. And that's critical, because you will have things you are really good at that actually drain you. All right, I know I am top of the hour, so I better wrap up. So if there's anything else you would like to know, this is the framework based on Kim Cameron. We are actually going to be running an online positive leadership program, so if there's anything you want to know, please let me know. We do actually have Mesquite accreditations, not only in Melbourne and Sydney, but we will come anywhere in the world to you if you've got a group of people you would like to get together to do the Mesquite. I love the Mesquite, it's a brilliant tool. If you want to know more about strengths, please let me know. Thank you, Melody. Yeah, there are other tools out there, absolutely. Thanks, Diane. The Diploma of Positive Psychology, if you want to know anything about that, they run around the world. And I am going to just, oh, you don't want that one, but there is a Byron Bay retreat, which is now full, so that's no good. Please go online to our resources tab of our website, have a look at some of the ebooks, white papers, the activities. We do make everything really fun and practical. So please let me know. And we are also doing an online certificate in positive leadership that will be launched next year. So please stay connected with us, make sure you've got our information. And certainly as soon as I get all your contact details, we will send a follow-up. I will make sure you've got slides, links, whatever else it is you need. If not, email me, sue@langleygroup.com.au, and I hope you have a fabulous day or evening or whatever else it is you are doing out there. And yeah, sorry, I've gone 2 minutes over time. Thank you so much, everybody.